Let's call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. So just for background, before we kick off this meeting, I just wanted to note that we would normally hold the re-vote of the officer at the start of this meeting, but Ms. Kowalski is currently traveling, and so I put the vote intentionally at the end of the meeting to accommodate her schedule. I understand there was a concern, or shall we say a school of thought, that we would proceed with the vote, but that is certainly not the right thing to do. And so I will not call the vote until the full group is available. So with that, if we could go into our public hearing, which somehow seems to be down to one. So I'm not sure what happened that we've gone from so many, just a little, but I guess as people don't get excited about numbers, is that the takeaway? We took the capital out, we took the masks off, is what Cody said. I think it's that we're talking about numbers, Cody, and numbers bore people. So except for a few of us. So let me call the first person, which is Roger Rosendahl. Is he online? Because he's not in the room, since I can identify every person in the room.
I do not see a Roger.
Okay, next, Molly Salibi, who I understand has asked to be removed. So how about that? And that closes out our public comment. Well, I'm going to give credit to Ken Borsick for showing up for why our public comment went to zero.
Would you like me to jump over there and give some public comment?
Yes, exactly. Could Karen Hirsch please come to the podium? So with that, we are going to first go to ARP is the next thing on our agenda. And Ms. Downey?
When you're ready, I have questions. Start? What?
Do
Yeah,
you,
you know, yeah. I just,
okay, go ahead. Say sorry.
where's Blaze? There he is. Thank you for getting this in such a nice, organized way. My one comment, and this kind of goes to the budget questions and to this. I know we've talked about it before, and I know you guys are crunched, but getting documents the day of a meeting is really problematic. It's very frustrating, and it doesn't really give us sufficient time to analyze them. I mean, we can do a quick cursory, that's for those of us, the people at work. I'm sure it's even more difficult. Michael Joseph's driving from the Bronx. So I really can't emphasize enough that if we have any further requests, that we get them as expeditiously and in advance as possible so that the board can have an adequate opportunity to review them. So thank you. Not trying to scold you, but sort of. Do you want to come to the podium? I don't know, do we want to share this on the
That would be great. Can we
screen
share?
would that be like, is that doable? Just because I mean, I have a lot of questions about this because I did spend my time on the ARP this afternoon, but I'll let Blaze run through it because then I'd answer get ahead of the questions. Thank you.
Hello,
Hi, Blaze.
sorry. No, I think that the primary focus, and you did hit it on the head, we're pretty overwhelmed at the moment. And we're gonna, I think, set up a Q&A to continue the conversation on ARP. This is really the first, I think, kind of read or presentation of ARP, but no actions being taken. And I think we're gonna put together a Q&A as a result of the last minute posting so that we can have an ongoing conversation. The time sensitive element is the superintendent's proposed budget. So I've been trying to put a lot of effort there.
And just to that point, I think I'm just going to also throw out there, if it's going to be productive, I want to suggest that maybe if needed, the budget committee could meet maybe next week if we feel it's warranted after our discussion tonight. So the other three of you, I will put that out there.
A lot of the fiscal year structuring of the grant too is something, that the town of Greenwich made up. It doesn't have to be implemented in the way that it is before you. And one of the reasons that this takes so long to put together and to monitor at the moment, and what we're going to work with town finance to do, is set this up so it actually looks like it does before you right now. This looks nothing and how you've had it presented to you, it looks nothing in any way, shape, or form like that in the financial software. Everything before you is a manual, basically manually putting this together so you can have it in this view. I think this is the view that makes sense, and this is the view that we've been looking at. So this is the view that the software system should be, and it shouldn't be the other way around. So that's something that we are working on with town finance. We do have, it requires more accounts, and we do have over 12,000 account codes. So they are reluctant sometimes to set up additional ones, but it's something that we have to work on. Do you want me to kick off ARP? Do we want to just do a little really high level overview, or?
I think that'd be helpful because some of our newer members too, just to refresh everyone's memory.
Yeah, so this is the American Rescue Plan ESSER 3 funding that we're looking at before you. This was $9.5 million that was appropriated from the federal government directly to the Board of Education. Independent, this is completely independent view of the 31 million or so that was the town's view, of which they appropriated the $7 million for capital investment, primarily in HVAC for the Board of Ed. So this is only the Board of Ed finance. Fiscal year 22, if we use this view, and fiscal year 23 are both appropriated already to the Board of Education. And then although the town does have the remaining 2024 funds, it's something that we will go through as part of the budget process to have the town technically, appropriate the remaining funding. So what we're doing now is looking at basically the actuals of fiscal year 22 funding, current 2023. So you'll see in the original budget that the board had originally been presented with last year, the revised budget 2022, we had to reappropriate a number of funding for a few reasons, which I'll run through at a high level, into 2023. And then as part of our 2024 request to the town, most of the funding has been reappropriated in a way that I would say is non-substantive or into accounts that were already kind of pre-approved, just moved either by fiscal year. The primary reason in so if we go through by section in human resources, you'll see a number of $365,000 that was reappropriated that we projected spending last year. Part of that is actuals. Now that we have actuals, salaries are done on a fiscal year. The other piece is that there were minor things like instead of hiring 3.5 special education teachers, we only need to hire as part of this program 3.0. There was a 0.5 teacher for English that ended up being removed from ARP. So you'll see the primary bulk of the savings there. The substitute incentive pay that was projected for 2022 was absorbed by the operating budget for the Board of Ed. So the $249,239 that was projected in the 2022 fiscal year was reappropriated to the remaining 2 fiscal years. As we talk about the 2024 budget, which is really still the focus, one of the ways that you'll notice that we were able to come in at 2.9% is because we are still very reliant on the federal funding that we have in the budget, and we were able to take advantage of the funding that we have. So other than those 3 items, it's just lining up with actuals for 2022. The benefits projection was a direct, transfer by the town. The facilities, the facilities is a big change here. When the Board of Ed originally budgeted their funding in 2022, the town had not yet directed the HVAC funding. And so there was some overlap. You had you had planned funding in 2022 prior to realizing that the town was going to share $7 million for specific projects as that was going through the conversation in the budget process. So the North Mianus HVAC and ionization project of $206,000 is something that in 2022 that the town ended up providing $243,000 for through ARP funding. Same thing in 2023, there's $325,000 that was for HVAC ionization for 4 schools. At the time, that was something that Dan knew we had to do, but we then further developed that program to the 4 specific schools, and the town appropriated that funding as part of the $7 million. PPE is a big difference, but as we know, when this was put together, the 2021 timeframe was a very different situation, and the Board of Ed began receiving significant funding or equipment for free from the federal and state government. You know, the tests, the masks, all those shipments, some of which we still have a lot of the supplies with left. So we went from a projection of having to be someone that was paying for a lot of that stuff to starting to get that sent to the schools for free. And then we also absorbed some of that in another COVID CARES grant, ESSER 2, as well as some into the operating budget. But it was primarily because of the transition to the other funding sources and the federal and state government pumping these into the school system for free through the state and the distribution. And then when we get down into teaching and learning, there's a couple of just, basically actuals shoring up or supply chain issues. There's some of these are encumbrances, but it's a relatively minor, there's no substantive changes in the 2022 for where we're seeing some of that money reappropriated. You're just seeing projections versus actuals. And, once you're actually the boots on the ground implementing the budget. To reappropriate the funding, you'll basically see that we've done a few things that most of them are just realigning things within the pre-approved categories of ARP within those 2 within the existing fiscal years. The ones that are a little bit different, again, I think that are of note is that substitute incentive pay was, part of that was reallocated or is being proposed, reallocated into 2023 to support that budget as we continue to still have a high, number of people having to be out and a high rate of subs, and also, having substitutes be a challenge. And in 2024, it was used, as one of the major risk areas of the operating budget is the sub incentive pay. We also have no idea. The intent of the funding is to address, pandemic related issues. And we know that we don't know what the virus is going to look like. So it's challenging which virus we could even be talking about. So it's something that was placed into 2024. The other major change here is the facilities overtime, which we know is another major risk area for the operating budget. It was last year due to COVID. It continues to remain an issue this year and probably will partially next year, although we are working both aggressively, Dan and I and Dr. Jones, and going through actually, meeting with some of the custodians today, actually, to work on custodial overtime, but we still have people out. We still are doing extra cleaning. We still have people nervous. And so the bulk of the funding, $150,000 each year, reappropriated over the course of 2023 and 2024. There's some money, which is something similar that the town has that we could really use as a Board of Education to help support the administration and accounting of the grant. It's a rather minor dollar amount in relation to everything else, but it's something that could be really important, and it's something that new, so it should be talked about. This would be hiring an outside firm likely to just help with the grant accounting and administration, both over the course of the next 2 fiscal years, and more importantly, to help us finalize the audit for when we have to, report on how we use the grant funds. And then I would say probably the most significant change would be taking the sum of the unappropriated or the reallocated funding and putting it in fiscal year 2024 as a proposal of $800,000 to use, which is in the intent of the grant to support learning needs and curriculum development. That is something that's still being discussed about what that exactly will look like, but we know that there is potentially a significant unfunded mandate in relation to curriculum. And one of the ways we were able to still produce a 2.9% budget, but potentially still satisfy a significant unfunded mandate from the state of Connecticut would be to utilize ARP funding in 2024 for curriculum materials. There is a lot of pushback. I'm not the person to really talk about that. So I won't, I'll let Dr. Jones elaborate on the curriculum, but I just want to emphasize to everyone listening and to the board that the board just received this document today. And so the intent here is to give you a very high level thought process. So as you're still looking at the budget over the next 2 weeks, that you can kind of see how this supports that budget, that 2.9% number, and how critical it is, and kind of the thought process in the budget. And then we will continue to do a Q&A because I know that there will be some specific questions about that. And I will hand it over maybe to Dr. Jones to talk about that, why that curriculum unfunded mandate is something that's so significant. If that
Yeah.
sounds good.
Yes, and 1 second, I was gonna say, first of all, thank you. That was a very helpful overview, recognizing we just got it. And a couple of things I'd say, I really like that you highlighted the point, and that's why we sort of married these two things tonight, ARP and then the budget, because the reason we were able to sort of stay within the guidelines or under 3% in this high inflationary environment was a result of the fact that we can still use much of this funding. So thank you for pointing that out. And I think it's also important to note that this is just the beginning of the conversation for the 2024 ARP discussion. And I'm sure all of us are reacting to an $800,000 number in curriculum, which I'm sure you're about to address, but that's something that obviously we'll have many months to opine on. It's not something we're talking about just tonight.
Yeah. To be very clear before we have the conversation, the layout before you, 2022 is already done. 2023, we're talking about right now, and most of it's non-substantive, but we'll have some conversations, but most of the money was approved in the existing categories. But for 2024, this money still has to get appropriated. The way the town appropriates it is through the entire budget process, but it's independent. So the board has, months to have this conversation. So this is the first look at this. The only reason we wanted to get it to you early is one, because this is important information and we're going to start reporting on this every month for you in this view, so you can see the actuals and how they're lining up. But we also will have time before we have to basically act upon a 2024 submission.
See, I'm not sure. I think we need to get some clarity on that, because I know when we had these 22 and 23 funds appropriated, we talked about, because it is part of our budget process, I envisioned just in my head that we'd be voting on the fiscal year 24 ARP money in 2 weeks when we vote on the budget, because then it has to go to the BET and the RTM in the same way as the rest of the budget. And I could be wrong, but I thought
Right. It's the calendar year 24, right? As opposed to.
It's kind of a made up thing. So I think we can,
Okay,
I'll
okay.
talk to.
I think we should just get
I'll
some
talk to
clarity
the-
about what everybody's expectations are
Yeah,
and when, like,
I'll double check
just do
with,
we have, like,
with
how much
town
time, when-
finance.
right.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful.
What we don't necessarily need to have this for is in our budget book submission for January.
I agree.
the
I guess the
handoff.
question is the BET going to want to make this part of budget day when they do the discussions, which is end of January?
Yes, it starts into February. Yep,
Right. So I
will,
mean, so I think
do
we
that
should just
for
get
you.
some clarity. And because I also just the question for the deadline to, like, I know because you refresh us all of the deadlines to, there are deadlines for telling them how you're going to spend the money and actually spending the money with ARP. Could you just, because I believe there was like a little disconnect on the dates. Do you
Yeah.
have those handy?
Yeah, off the top of my head, if I recall correctly, the funding for this ARP for the BOEs, which is different than the towns, is the town on capital, we actually have a longer time. We have to have them obligated by December 31st of 2024, but we don't have to have them fully spent, I believe, by 2026, but I'll follow up with an email to the board on that. These funds have to be spent fully obligated by September 31st, 2024. So the fiscal year, obviously, we're looking at it 2023, but the BOE funding has to be fully obligated by September 30th, 2024.
I think it's encumbered, but I have to, yeah.
Encumbered, yeah.
Right. I think that's the key. Joe, and then, sorry, Dr. Jones, you wanted to say something too.
I'll
Go
just
ahead.
be
Go ahead.
real quick, and I'll probably ask this question just about every time we talk about this. Are you 100% confident that we will allocate the money properly and timely where none of this money has to get sent back to the government?
Yes,
Thank you.
this money's getting spent.
Yeah, just to speak to the 800,000, it's very strategic why we've put it in here. At the end of the legislative session last spring, they passed for the science of reading for the state of Connecticut, that they had to set up a reading committee at the state. That committee was going to come together. They were going to recommend the reading programs for the state of Connecticut. And then we would be, I'm going to use the word forced, to actually select one of those programs. And we were going to have to do that by December. And this all happened from the end of last year through now. However, when they came out with the 5 selections, everybody in the state, the districts, were very unhappy. There were less than 10 districts that used any of the programs that they were putting forward. Those of us that have been implementing like foundations and doing all this great work, we were supposed to throw that out and purchase one of these 5 programs. For us, that would have been well over $1 million. So you can imagine, even in the large urban districts, how expensive. So right now, we're kind of in a holding pattern. What they have said is that we will be able to apply for a waiver. And this is as of this week. This is kind of like if those of you remember back during COVID, and we would say they haven't made their decision yet. They haven't made their decision yet. It kind of feels like that. So what we will do is we're applying for a waiver. And what we don't know now is we're either going to have a waiver holistically, here's our program, and it's one form, or we're going to have to go into each area for the science of reading. And they might say foundations is okay, but your decodables are not, which are the readers that go along with it. So we need some funds. We know we are going to have to invest in reading, and we did not build it into the budget. Again, we just were trying to figure out what was going on over the summer, and we build our budget so early. So it's definitely money we're going to need for reading. And so that's why it's there, and we're trying to be smart about it so we don't have to go for an interim for reading materials.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask, because I know we had gotten information regarding the waiver program that they're starting to look into for the science of reading. If, I guess this is a sort of an open-ended question, depending on how that goes, because we don't even have that yet, information, if it gets pushed back further, how will that affect us being able to use this funding? And it's not a question we necessarily been answered to now, but
Well, they have said they're
Depends
not
on how far
pushing the
back.
waiver back. I mean, they've been very clear about that. We are going to have to file for a waiver. They can't figure out right now. I don't know if there's disagreement between different groups, but what the form is going to look like, what the waiver is going to, is it going to be a waiver for every component of reading, or is it just one waiver? But they have clarified for us, even in the last week or two, we're definitely going to have a waiver.
just because, do we know when the actual documents from the state on what programs we're going to be required to use? Because it's still sort of in draft form right now.
They actually put out the 5 programs and they were solid on it. However, it's to the point that even CAPS, the superintendent's organization, hired an attorney to actually take this issue up with the state, because the districts overwhelmingly, people are not in favor of this at all.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow. Well done.
That was why I was asking. Thanks.
Michael Joseph, did you have a question?
And it's one just on that point too, before we move on to the next topic, on that point, I think, so that we're monitoring this closely. Although my staff, until we get this fixed in the back end, will probably be banging their heads against the wall. It's one of the reasons we want to report on this every month to you, because these dollars all have a very sensitive time frame, and we'd want to be able to have a conversation if it looks like that time frame is going to be adjusted for some reason, or even if it's not curriculum, it's something else here that we're talking about. The dollars do have to be spent. So it's why we want to start reporting on this to the board on a monthly basis.
MJ, did you? have something?
Trying to understand here, as I'm looking at 23, so is this expenditure that we're anticipating, is that is that part of line 32 or is that separate from the classroom libraries learning loss K2? Is that?
Yeah, line 32 are decodables that they need more of based on teacher input. They just don't have enough. That is line 32. The line we're discussing is down on line 47 and go all the way over to the right.
And it's in 24 so that we can have the conversation as part of the appropriation.
And then I'm still confused to make sure I'm clear here, because the fiscal years and these years, I know everything doesn't line up. So let me just make sure I understand. So when we're talking about, for example, the FTEs in the budget, right? So 24 in this, is that expenditure for next year's students, of next year's teachers? Is that the 15.5 in next year or the year after?
The 2024, or I'm not sure if I'm following your question, but
I
the
think I understand it actually,
Okay.
because it is confusing. So the 2024 on here is married to our 23-24.
yes, okay, yeah.
Because I guess that whether or not we're approving this in 2 weeks at the budget line or not, if most of the 24 expenditure is tied up in FTE, I mean, it's pretty much our hands are tied in that regard.
Well, correct, except if yes, because those would be in theory hires that you would be making next summer.
And then, so just to clarify, to make sure everybody's clear. So, because I think I counted right, I think it's 15.5 full-time equivalent represented here. So after next year, so this time next year, we're going to be having the conversation about how we, without any federal funds, how we're absorbing the cost of that human capital expense.
We've really already been doing that. And even in this current budget that we've presented, if you look at, let's see, line 11, you'll notice that originally where we had social workers in there, we had part of them in ESER 2, we had 1 and 3. And then when you go across to 23, you can look at that number and it's much larger. In the 24 budget, we had budgeted, but we have already moved 2 of those social workers into operating because we know that we need to start, if we want to keep those positions, they have to be built into operating. So we've already started that. Some of the positions we've already eliminated. That's why you see so much white kind of on that revised budget.
So it looks like we basically have 1.7, if you're saying right now, line 16, right? The revised budget we're looking at 1.7 right now. We still have to figure out a way to absorb. Is that right?
1.7 million in salaries. That is correct.
So we're defending against our fiscal cliff.
But yeah, that's something we've been talking about and something you've been planning for, right?
And I think for you, which would be helpful for you, and I think also for myself, would be to break down the FTE in a little more clear of a way, just specifically following the FTE over fiscal year that are in the grant. It's kind of hard to tell by just following the dollars. I'll do that and share it.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Karen? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you down there. Okay, go ahead.
Can we talk about in facilities? I would like an update on the GHS Student Center, if you could, Tony. And then also this on line 27, the Central Middle School Structure Analysis, you took it out, but I thought we did pay for that. So I'm a little confused if you could clarify that.
Yeah, you want to do the student center first?
Yeah, so the student center has all been encumbered. We're working with WB Mason. We actually changed the person who was helping us with the design, and it's all moving forward. So we're excited about that.
Do we have a timeline of just a ballpark?
That's so hard because of the supply chain issues.
But things have been ordered?
No, that's what we actually have a meeting. Is it this week? I think it's like in the next few days.
Monday,
Monday,
right?
yeah. So hopefully everything will go in and it'll come.
The CMS, and I'll let Dr. Jones correct me if I'm wrong, but the CMS study was completed, or when this $100,000 was projected, it was prior to the issues at Central Middle School. And then so you were planning on the $100,000 analysis for the building, but then obviously there was the serious problems at Central Middle School. And then the district received a significant appropriation from the town, an interim appropriation, and that's where that ended up being part of that because it was a different scenario than what was planned on being done.
Since I spent my afternoon.
Keep going,
Can we talk about the virtual team coaching that we took out from last year? Do you want to just explain that, if you don't mind?
We just didn't utilize it. If it's something like that.
And I would say also, and I can answer this specifically via email, but that funding, some of this funding was either not used or absorbed. So you're matching up actuals.
And so just back to the kind of the timing of the expenditures. So I just want, so in the 24 number, it's calendar year for non-staff related, or is it, everything ties to our budget?
Everything we're looking at here is in fiscal year. for you.
Okay, so fiscal year 24, so
Budget
so
to budget.
theoretically, I'm just gonna say, in the event that we do have some money left over by June 30 of 24, which would be the end of the 20-year budget, 24 budget, we actually could appropriate any leftover funds in the early part of the 25 budget, because if they don't have to be spent till September 30th, and our fiscal year starts July 1st, we actually have a cushion of a couple of months to spend the last, if there's,
You'd have to execute quickly. Yeah.
but we,
We
but,
do.
but
We
we,
would know.
but we would likely know that by
Yes.
spring of 24.
Yes.
So that we could then,
You are
again,
correct.
to Joe's point, not waste a dollar.
You are correct.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Yep. And I am going to, before you, as part of your Q&A, but I'm going to specifically reach out to town finance to ensure that we're both on the same page and also confirm timelines and expectations for you.
Ms.
I'm-
Hirsch? Sorry.
I'm just doing-
back to-
Tony, can you just talk about the, for this year, the pre-K curriculum and furniture? If you don't mind.
Sure. So with preschool, we've been working on our curriculum all the way through the district. And we've realized that in preschool, we really have not had a focus on curriculum at all, like ever. And so we've never bought curriculum materials, which is early childhood, one of the most important areas to get children ready for school. So they're doing a lot of work vetting right now. It'll come through the curriculum committee, those of you that are on there, looking at what's out there. Again, science of reading. We did implement Haggerty and Foundations in pre-K already this year because there was a big need for that. But this is much larger scale. Pre-K furniture, we're growing so quickly. And as you know, furniture generally in our capital budget keeps getting cut. And we were very fortunate when we added section 14 that United Way worked with us and actually did a grant for preschool furniture to help us set that room up. But we still have 2 more classrooms that are going to need to be set up. So this is going to help us with that. And that's when you talk about furniture for preschool, I mean, you're talking about rugs and all the manipulatives and the kitchens, and it's quite a bit of equipment.
Go ahead, Karen.
Well, then a big thanks to the United Way for that, because that's fantastic. I was looking at the 2 other areas under, well, first of all, I just think it's great to see that the majority of these funds are going directly towards teaching and learning. I don't know why I sound so loud, and going towards, staff to support academic and social and emotional needs of our students. That's fantastic, because I know that was the initial intent for all of us. So I know last year we had asked a little more information about the school climate consultant, and you'd shared information that it's that they were, focused on professional development sessions and providing, in the areas of social and emotional support indicators for high school staff, and providing general education staff with tools to support students with needs in the general education classroom, which also directly aligns with the special education audit. I know last year they had a couple of sessions set up, some of which had to get rescheduled due to weather, inclement weather and other things. And I know we have a much larger chunk put aside for them this year and then going forward. So I was just wondering if you might be able to, even if it's not tonight, just give us a little bit more detail and information on what the school climate consultants are going to be working on this year. And have we, added back those sessions from last year that got got pushed back.
They did complete their sessions last year, as many as they wanted to do. And I don't know if you can speak to this better than I can, this 35-8 for school climate. Are they using the same consultant? I have to use the mic.
Check, check.
We're using a different consultant for this year. We have not finished vetting the people that have been recommended to the high school. So as soon as we do that, I can bring that information to you.
That would be great. And then we'll have an idea of sort of the areas. I don't know if it's in the same areas or what, but as long as we have an opportunity to sort of hear what they're going to be doing, it'd be great. And then my next question is for FACE, family and community engagement, which was part of our prior strategic plan. It's one of the goals in our current strategic goals document, which hopefully will be moving forward. So I'm wondering if there's been some consideration as sort of how we're going to be able to continue to support the area and our consultant after the funding from ARP and ESSER's has ended. I'd also really love to get an update on the work being done in that area at some point in a future meeting. I know the consultant is always willing to come and speak and has been doing some great work. It really ties in nicely with all of the things that we're doing. And again, part of our strategic plan, prior and current. As we all know, it's one of the factors that determines student outcomes. Family engagement is at the top of the list. It contributes to positive student outcomes and improved child and student achievement, decreased disciplinary issues, and improved parent-teacher and teacher-student relationships, and supporting a positive school environment. So I'd really love to have the opportunity to hear a little bit more about how that's going at some point, because it's such an important area for us. So if that's possible, I'd like to put that out there, and if we're going to consider, I'm sure there's hearing how, the positive work that's being done, how we're considering continuing on that path as it's part of our plan.
And that's the work with Patty Jomo, who's the consultant, and she's working with all 11 elementaries right now. We haven't really talked, I think, beyond kind of 23, 24, because part of it is teaching the skill set so that they can do it on their own, and how they have peer-led conferences and things of that nature. So we'll be circling back to that as we're implementing the strategic plan in this area. And, and a big issue is even just because we've never done conferences in secondary, it's difficult for our staff to actually visualize how that could look because they've never done it. So we have a lot of work to do just in that area.
Well, thank you for that. And a big thank you to our consultants, because I know they work really hard and it's in such important areas.
Any other questions?
Open to also feedback on changes and formatting and things like that, as well as we.
I think it looks great. I think it's very easy to understand.
For the
Whether input
Great.
is a pain in the neck, it's very easy for someone looking at it to understand.
Okay,
So-
thank you. That I'm glad. That's one of the reasons it took so long to get it to you, but
Maybe just a little bigger.
yeah. We got to get Dan's map printer for some of these ones. But we will have, so in the monthly report, well, we'll go, do a Q&A, but when we start producing this, like for 2023, we'll have a actual, year-to-date actual encumbrance column, and then a remaining balance, so we can track it like we do with the other financials. And I'll get on ARP, I'll get the FTE breakdown over the fiscal years for you early next week, probably, looking Monday to get that to you.
Okay, so I think we can move then to our next agenda item on operating budget. And just so you know, I am tracking Karen Kowalski's flight. I told her, I felt like I was her mother asking for her flight information. Like the only other person that's ever asked me for my flight information is my mother. So, and it looks like she might be arriving ahead of schedule, but I know there'll be, time to get off the plane and that whole thing. So let's keep going. And with that, and I imagine we have a lot to talk about on the operating budget. So anything you want to say before we dive in? Oh, yes, please go ahead. Why don't you go, Dr. Jones?
Because the two Q&A look quite similar, the one that was sitting on the table were the questions that Karen Kowalski sent late today. So, and the questions that were in your blue folder are the questions that we sent out earlier. So just so you know, there's two sets. And then the very colorful projection sheet. Whenever you're ready, I can walk you through how that's utilized.
Okay, who wants to start? Okay, oh wait, Karen, go ahead, ask her the question.
Sorry, one of the questions I had asked in October was about classroom projection, and I know you'd said it was going to be in this document, and I saw it in the Q&A, so I'm happy to see it here. So I'd love for you to be able to walk us through that quickly, because it's new to me. I haven't seen it since sitting here, other than that.
And I will say it is, sorry, it's right, it was at your seat. Does everyone see it? Okay. Okay, so it probably looks more colorful this year than it normally does. And that is what it means is that everything that is red is a section that is high. Now, when you look at this, what you're seeing is the number of classrooms that are in place currently right now. So if you, let's just look at Cos Cob. In kindergarten, we have 3 sections. So you'll see where it says sections. And again, a section is just a classroom. Grade 1 is 3, grade 2 is 2. So we start out, we don't move anybody. Everybody's just sitting at Cos Cob. Then we plug in the projections for the next year. So we haven't moved anybody yet. If it's red and we didn't change anybody, Cos Cob would have 27 students in 2nd grade. And that's too high according to our guidelines. Grade 3 and grade 4 would both be low, which means that that's a possible move of a teacher. And then grade 1 is yellow, and that means it's right on the threshold. It could sit where it's just under and you don't need a teacher, or it could slightly go up by 1 or 2 students and all of a sudden you need a teacher. So we have to work through the entire district, and when we're building the budget, it's like doing a giant puzzle because you really have to consider all of the moves. And every year as we get closer to the school year starting, what will happen? Like this year, we had 75 children in kindergarten that showed up. We didn't anticipate. So where you see some of those green or yellow may very well need that teacher. So you can't assume you can just automatically move them. As we get closer to the school year, that's where we'll look at a grade level, like at Cos Cob in 3rd grade, that is still low. If it doesn't grow over the summer, you take that position and you move that position to another building where they're high and they need an extra position. And we physically move that teacher from one building to the other. Now, what it doesn't mean, and I'm saying this quite frankly, more for the teachers than I am the board, because this scares them when they see this. So, because they think people are going to lose their job, that everyone's going to be moved all over the district. And what happens is in Cos Cob, let's say we need to move a teacher, it's all based on seniority. There's a process for that. Now we don't move like a 5th grade teacher to 1st grade. You know, we have early childhood, upper. We work with the teachers the very best that we can. If there are 2 openings in the district where somebody retired, you know, we're working with where maybe they taught in another building previously. So we're very thoughtful about it. And again, this goes all the way up until school starts. In this current year that we're in now, we were originally slated to lose 5 sections. And even though we were up in kindergarten by 75 students, we actually went down 8 sections. And it just has to do with where the kids land, at which schools, and what the number of each section is. So now that you're totally confused, I'll take questions.
Well, I was just going to say, because is it still, you know, we usually, you set a projection at the start of the school year, but we still have a couple of weeks into the school year before it's finalized. I know it used to be, what was it, September? 15th,
Rarely,
October,
rarely,
or something?
rarely. I mean, we try to be better than that before school starts, because you don't want to be moving children after school has started for,
Yeah,
especially K-5. It's-
Nobody wants to be moved from classroom to classroom or but in the years I've been in the district, it has happened once or twice. So I just wanted to be clear that even though we start the school year as a certain thing, we still have a little wiggle room after that in case there's a major change. I see a nod from over there.
Yeah, and that's important. I think the other thing that I do too is we get all of our pre-K enrollment in the spring. Everyone that's sitting out in our community preschools. And we try to make sure that we kind of calculate those children in. We try to get everybody pre-enrolled that we can. So then I go through it again, and this is just me, and I'm looking at, okay, which buildings from June to September held very close to projection based on what we thought was going to happen, and which buildings actually saw huge swings, because often that's driven by things like housing, the in-migration. And so it's really looking at if a building really was way above projection, okay, what happened there? And an example would be like this year, we were projected at New Lab to have 48 students. If you had gone by the June projection, they ended up having 61. That's what I'm talking about, is what happened this year, just how the process works. So I go back in and I look at where we are in June, what we think everyone's pre-enrolled, everybody that we know that's coming. Now, which buildings are we likely to see larger shifts? Because you have to watch those buildings very closely. The other thing we've struggled with in Greenwich a little bit is we're not automated on our enrollment. And so if you're AA, they take the summer off. And unless they're brought in for extra hours, you can have packets of enrollment sitting on somebody's desk and it wouldn't get put in the system. So this year, we're actually automating for the first time. So I'm hoping that's really going to help as well.
Okay. Michael Joseph.
So I'm wondering about the transfer process, and how much is contractual? I mean, are we bound? Do we have to go by seniority? Because, I think you think about it, and that's something to think about, because, you look at a school that obviously of a school where maybe the scores are a little lower and we'd want a more seasoned, experienced teacher there. But if we're going by seniority, we might not be able to do that.
That's correct. It's very much driven by working with the union on seniority within a building. Unless it has to do with a grade level, like a first grade teacher, we wouldn't send to just automatically fifth grade when they've
Right.
never taught fifth grade.
No, so within a building, or from building to building,
Well, what you have to do is look at like COSCOB, where if that third grade doesn't grow and they won't need that third section, somebody from COSCOB has to move. And
Well-
some buildings are harder than others, because some buildings have hired so few people because they don't have huge turnover. And we had a situation this year where in one building, we were coming back to the same teacher again, who had already moved like 2 years previously for the same issue, because there wasn't a lot of turnover in the building. And people have been in the building for 15 years. So you're talking about, is it the second year or third year person? Or are you starting to look at people who've been in the building 15 years?
But to that point, we have a certain number who leave or retire or move every year, right? So does that help the process? I mean, obviously that's across, like, even through high school. So I just don't know, obviously this is more relevant to primary than secondary.
Yes, it does help the process. That's why when you look at all of these colors, you have to really take it with a grain of salt right now. It's too early. It helps me when we're building the budget. No, I feel very comfortable that we're reducing 3 sections. And I've gone in and I've cross-referenced, all of these ups and downs. And then you look at how many are sitting still in yellow, and I feel very, comfortable. But if somebody retires from COSCOB, then great. You didn't have to move somebody out of a third grade section. Now, you may have to move a second grade teacher to a different level or something like that, but it definitely helps.
Go ahead, Joe. Also.
Mine's more a curiosity question, just about teachers. Is it that teachers generally want to stay where they are, or is it they have a like for one school versus another school?
Generally, especially in elementary, the only word I can use to describe it, we're neighborhood schools, it's like a family. The staff, you saw it today, you were at Old Greenwich, they're very close knit. They want to stay together. They all have uniqueness to their buildings also. So it's hard to move a teacher. We used to physically move them in like June. And when this first summer that I was starting, I had one teacher who had her boxes moved to 2 different buildings before September. She was like in tears. And then she ended up going back to her building because they grew by September. And I was like, we're not doing that again.
Go ahead, Cody.
Is it the simple understanding that the change in sections next year is there's 15 green boxes and 9 red boxes, and so we'll probably end up with 6 fewer?
No, not necessarily. And especially like this
Oh,
year,
let me, if all the numbers stayed exactly as projected, then would that be the case?
if they all stayed as projected, they can cancel each other out. Yes.
Go ahead, Christina.
I just want to be sure I understand. So the projected number, like you said, it says using 2022 sections. I want to be sure. These are the projected numbers of students but using this year's section. This is the existing number of sections, but with next year's anticipated class. Like just looking kind of, which I'm sure probably won't bear itself out, like North Mianus, only with 39 projected kindergartners would obviously never have 4 sections, right? Okay, but we had 4 this year because you see that group of kids is 82 kids, because now you've moved them up to first grade, right? So just to be sure I understand. Got it.
Okay, Claire, this was very helpful. Thank you. Should we move to other questions on the operating budget? Ms. Cossum?
Sorry, I have one question about the chart because there's 2 lines of projections for each school, projected and then projected, and all the numbers are the same.
So by the time you see this in September and school starts, one line becomes actual and one was the projection. So you can look at what was projected, what was the actual. Right now, we can't tell you the actual because they're not here
Got
for
it.
23, 24.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, Cody.
And this is just like this is just for our information. There's not decisions we need to make on this, or is it, would you recommend that we ever look at the class size guidelines as part of the exercise of evaluating?
I think the challenge with that, especially in our second, third, fourth, and fifth, is we're already on the high end for Fairfield County. So at some point, I would imagine adjustments have been made over time. The one building we probably talk the most about is kindergarten at Hamilton Avenue. It's artificially very low, and it doesn't seem like it's had a And it doesn't seem like that has really made a difference. So we've talked about that because it would also help have more magnet seats in that building. And so it's 15, like in kindergarten, it's class size at 15. It's very small. And that was just a decision based on when it was a magnet, but it doesn't seem to really make a huge difference for student achievement or anything of that nature. And it kind of locks out having more magnet seats.
Yeah, I've read that there's an argument that the having too small of a class size is bad for students because it limits the learning they have from other classmates. That maybe that's something that we should visit like as an agenda item in the future of should we change the 15 class size for kindergarten?
Yeah, that one's
For
at
Ham Ave, you
Ham
mean
Ave.
specifically, right? It's different for Ham Ave is what you were saying.
That's
right?
based on their
Yeah,
physical space in the room. They're smaller than the rest of the district.
there's small people too, though.
I will say, when I first started teaching, I was in Nevada and this was years ago, obviously, and they went to 15-1. And I was teaching in a multi-age K-1 classroom. I didn't like it because if you had 2 or 3 children who were absent, sick and flu season, you had so few students, you lost a lot of the social dynamic and the conversation, and especially in a building where EL, you want more conversation. I don't think you want big classes, but I think we could in Ham Ave go up slightly, and it might actually be beneficial.
And just a question, we only have it on their our class size for him, it's only kindergarten, the rest are all the same as the other schools? I don't know if first grade was as well. Okay, thanks. You can let us know. Yeah, because if it's a further discussion, we can talk
Right.
about.
There's one, I'm trying to remember, it was when I first joined the board, so it's like cobwebs in my head. But we, at the beginning of one budget season, we changed the high school number by like half a kid or something like that, but it moved. It wasn't, no, it was.
the year before.
It was the year before? Okay, all right. Was it middle school? I thought it was high school. I don't remember. Anyway, it was half a kid or something. Was it that, right?
I know it definitely impacted middle school because they've asked to change it. Like, I mean, but it really hasn't impacted them in all honesty. I watch all their master schedules.
But we did it, Cody, exactly for that. We did it to basically hit the budget at that time.
Well, and I'm even thinking beyond just like hitting budgets, just as it's something that can be toggled, and should we be like revisiting that, whether it should be higher or lower of, like, given that it's something that we have authority over, that maybe it's exactly optimal and correct, but I don't know, just as opposed to other things where it's just like, just for our information, we can actually change that one.
Okay, good. Okay, keep going. Questions on the operating budget?
Operating budget, I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, was it a coincidence that we came into a 2.9% budget, same as the BET guidelines? Is that a coincidence?
It's a good question. No, I don't think, that was a coincidence. It didn't happen by accident. So good question. I'll start it, and Dr. Jones, I'll let you answer. So we had a lot of deliberation as administration about the BET guidelines, about this fiscal year 24 budget and the challenges that we're facing. There's a few few points on that. The first major point is that as you look at the fiscal year 24 ARP appropriation that you just received, a specific reason we can come in at 2.9% is because we still have another year of federal funding, and that funding is millions of dollars. There are curriculum one-time purchases that we know at some point we're going to have to make. We have staff on ARP. And so it's going to be a challenge that's basically just going to be delayed by another fiscal year, but that we have time to think about and deliberately make those changes. So without ARP, this year we would not be at 2.9%.
But now we shared that information beforehand with the BET, so they're aware of our ARP funding.
They are, yeah.
So everyone worked together on putting a budget together with all the data points. There was no surprise that we were able to come into this budget or manage this budget. The BET advised us properly. We shared information with them to make them be able to give us projections or guidelines that we met. So it's kind of a good thing, isn't it?
It's a good thing. It happens to be a few things though on that. One, we've reappropriated over $2.4 million of the ARP funding, and a significant portion of that is going into 2024, including the two major risk areas that Dr. Jones presented in her presentation on the budget presentation, which is sub-incentive pay and facilities overtime. Those are changes that weren't communicated that we know were critical areas. There's a few other things to get there. It took, hours and hours of staff time reviewing every single possible line item in the budget, extensive review and considerations. There are some coming out of COVID. There are some, one-time cost savings. This is not a sustainable budget at 2.9%. Obviously, one, it wouldn't be done if it wasn't for ARP, and two, it wouldn't be. It's not a sustainable rate of cutting. Basically, there are significant reductions here. We have inflation that is driving up prices. We have a cost of contract that exceeds the rate of the increase of the budget. So that means that you're cutting in other areas. With some of the enrollment changes and sections, we are fortunately able to absorb other increases like special ed and pre-K by reducing headcount and sections in other areas. And coming out of COVID, I will add that, basically leaving crisis mode, administration is able to really do some of the deep diving into certain areas that probably basically over the last 2.5 years, managing a crisis has been a little bit more difficult to do. That's not something that is going to be that significant like it was this year in terms of a savings. The third thought process here of administration on that. So you have ARP, you have significant one-time savings, and without having to manage the crisis in the way we were able to go through line by line and do that and reduce headcount. This is not an annual headcount reduction to offset, to be able to come in at 2.9% every year. You're not going to be able to cut this much staff unless you continue to have changes in enrollment projections and you're able to absorb pre-K and special ed. The third thought process here is that for I want to say two straight years, towards the end of the budget process, a cut, for example, ends up being placed anyways into the Board of Ed budget. And that happens basically at the end of the budget process rather than something that administration was able to plan for strategically and that the board can have a conversation about. So last year, the town ended up reducing the budget by $500,000 towards the end of the budget process with no input of the Board of Education. That's something then if you're implementing a budget vote in May and you are then implementing a budget on July 1, that doesn't give the administration time to plan for that in a way that reduces impact. This year to come in at 2.9%, we're talking about reducing over $2 million. And so that needs to be well thought out. I think that administration feels that there are a number of one-time savings that we were able to go through. I think that Dr. Jones has presented very clear risk areas that do remain depending on a number of factors, and they are definitely risks, and that we would not be at 2.9% if it wasn't for ARP. The last point on that and the thought process here, which is something that we can talk about, is that since we can do this year and be a good partner as Greenwich Public Schools in the budget process, we obviously have and not by any fault of our own, a substantial conversation that we need to have on capital. And capital does affect the overall mill rate. And that is something here that is definitely still a thought process in terms of the budget you see before you. Before I finish my answer, I'll put it over to Dr. Jones if there's anything I missed or that you want to add. But
Let me jump in just for 1 second. 'Cause
Please do.
I'll lose my thought because you went on beyond the staff reduction.
Yes.
Sometimes staff reductions is necessary when we're making sure we look after the town's funds properly. What, if any, impact will the staff reduction have on education? Because obviously that's the goal. We want to make sure that we protect the quality of the education, but also looked at it in any fiscally conservative way.
So I would never bring the board a budget where we're reducing staff if we could not sustain our educational quality.
it's something we were very, very clear and deliberate about in what we were doing here to do this. It's why it's not sustainable to do it, but it's something that we did by really doing a deep dive. I mean, for hours and hours going through Dr. Jones went through every single classroom, staffing, every single room in this building, in the school system, basically, to really significantly do an audit of every single operation in this district. And so these are not things that are ongoing or recurring structural reductions, but they are something that we did as part of this process and that we also know we can supplant with ARP.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's good to look at all the one-time things over history. I remember that the bus savings allowed us to fund like that huge math program. So there are one-time things that have been trades, which are good things that we're now hopefully seeing the results of. And I don't want to ever forget sort of the past 3 years, all the efficiencies we found from reallocating people out of Havemeyer, putting them back in the classroom. So it's good. But looking forward, I think it's important to just talk about, and I know you've mentioned it, but maybe just since we're having that conversation, what are the risk factors in this budget? And it seems like the biggest one is frankly keeping the lights on, right? It's the energy costs.
The three biggest risk factors remain, and they're a little bit less so, but they remain substitute incentive pay, or substitute pay, I should say. What happens with substitutes? Facilities overtime and utility cost. There's not a lot happening here in this budget. There really changes in year over year. And those are the three major risk factors for 2024.
Not special education being over budget like usual.
I think we can keep our fingers crossed at the moment. The special education in this budget, to Joe's question, what we're absorbing by making some of these reductions and how we were able to come in at 2.9%, we're still increasing special education here by $1.2 million year over year. So we're increasing special education by 1.2 million. Special ed is always a risk factor, but it's something we talked a lot about, and basically all else consistent, we should be able to absorb it. I mean, one student could swing the whole thing out of whack, but with what we know now and what our current SCSS program is doing, it's not listed on the high risk factor.
Okay. Ms. Costin, did you have a question?
Why, yes. So the BET guidelines directed us to do two things in particular that piqued my interest, not necessarily in a positive way. One, they wanted us to identify unfunded mandates, and then they gave us the unfunded mandate of having to do a facility utilization study. And is there a time frame for that?
For me personally, no, not right now.
Sorry, Christina and then Joe.
I was going to start going through questions on the Q&A, a couple of them. It's up
Sounds
to, unless, did you have something else, Joe? So go for the quickie one.
The quickie one would be, does this budget impact the staff necessary to facilitate the needs of the stadium bathrooms?
That's a good question, because we've had a lot of conversation about these. This budget makes, to be clear, no change to how we operate Cardinal Stadium. And you bring up a good point, and it's a conversation that we should have. But right now, no change made in this budget. So the way it operates this year is the way it will continue to operate next year, unless the board wants to have a conversation about
Well, you know, it actually plays perfectly into what my first question was going to be, which was on page 2, when you talk about monies received from the town's general fund about facilities rentals. And I actually was going to ask the question about maybe we should be increasing our facilities rentals fees. I know we just did, but I think we only did it for this year, correct? When we voted
Yes, 2023. Yep.
So we voted for 23. I think we should consider, perhaps with all our cost increases, that perhaps that should be increased for 24, and perhaps part of that structure could be for people who want to use the stadium would pay for a bathroom attendant. I think it's worthy of consideration from my point of view. I think Joe would probably agree with me. What, restroom, custodian? Okay, so anyway, I don't know how we have a discussion about increasing rental fees.
And I think that the fee structure could use some revisiting in general, in light of a few things. One, the PAC card, it needs to be revised. The stadium, it's not even on there. So we're using
The student center?
The student center, and in light of rising electricity cost, I would say we're probably subsidizing people that are renting our facility.
Between the energy and the custodial, right? I mean, we certainly we don't need to be subsidizing every outside group that wants to come out and use our facilities. We're happy to let them use them, but at their cost, right?
It's something that we should revisit together.
What would you suggest the process for that being?
I think we could if there's some direction that the board would like to go in terms of what we want to see at these facilities, I think there's treating them a little bit differently. One, we will take a stab at, I think, internally on things like the fee structure for utility cost, I think for certain major renters, we need to look at having a deposit fee up front because you see a lot of people rent and schedule maybe 18 weeks worth of gym use. And then right before it happens and maybe staff are already scheduled, then they cancel they cancel their reservation or they blocked out other community groups because there's no deposit fee. So they jump, basically they jump on the first day that they could possibly submit the reservation. I think we take the first stab at presenting that to you. But I think as a board, you take the first stab at maybe giving us some direction on major facilities, what you would want to see potentially at Cardinal Field.
Well, we, if I may, we don't handle the leasing out of these facilities. Parks and Rec does. So maybe as we get a stab at getting a cost of what these assets are, then basically we should then have a conversation with them.
We do all of our facilities and we do the stadium. Parks and Recreation does the fields. And when it comes to Cardinal Field, Parks and Recreation has indicated that they will only charge fees and permit the field. They consider Cardinal Stadium to be a facility under the purview of the Board of Ed.
So like the other fields they do, is that what you mean? Like
They do
field-
our
field-
property. So if you're going to use the field or you're going to go to use the, say there's a youth league that wants to use field at Hamilton Ave or something, or they want to go over to Riverside and they want to rent the field, Parks and Rec manages the property rental. We're talking about the facility rental. And when it comes to Cardinal Stadium, and I think we should be coordinated with them. You bring up a good point that we need to coordinate with them, but they have indicated that they will not do any of the fee processing or rental of the stadium. They provide the porta johns and they will not be involved any other way other than
They're
that.
setting us up for failure in that structure.
Yes,
So obviously, we have to think amongst ourselves about making the rental of the field where Cardinal Stadium is, has to be a condition that they have to be involved in the whole facility in some fee structure. So I do not want, or we do not, or I do not want my group here to be blamed for the lack of the stadium's assets being opened or closed if they're renting the field out. So thank you. That's a good conversation. We'll have that. It's a small issue, so I won't bore anyone more with it. We'll work on that.
Can I jump on and ask
Yeah.
a follow-up? So we do, I don't know why this is so loud tonight. We have a lot of outside groups that will rent the high school fields and the stadium.
yes.
So is that a split ownership as to who does the renting? If they consider
Yep.
the stadium facilities, that those groups then have to go through us for that and Parks and Rec for the rest of the fields? Because that doesn't make a whole, like that
The field
This is where we
user-
were-
Yes,
talking about earlier. It doesn't make sense.
the field user fee is all set by the town and charged by Parks and Recreation. All fields are actually charged by Parks and Recreation. The stadium, the reason we're having the challenge with the stadium is because under the current understanding, and also the understanding from the union, is that it is our staff that have to do it. So unlike the other, if you rent out, even at the high school, if you're renting out the field and you're not using a facility, it's their staff and it's their team and it's their maintenance team that takes care of the field. The reason we're having the kind of the gray area issue is because at the stadium specifically, it would be our custodians and our staff that have to manage the stadium, which is where the issue is, where it is. At the
Yeah,
moment.
I would agree with Joe that I think this is something that needs not tonight, a further discussion,
Yes.
because if you're having an outside group that's booking both, it seems it should be a package deal, so to speak, and we have to figure out how to do that properly, right?
I do have to just make one comment. This was pointed out during the construction of the stadium, but I didn't listen to Dan Watson, who pointed this out as a problem. I think I ignored it a little bit. And so, yes, so we'll be reevaluating that one. So
I also will follow up with the board. I don't think we have it on us at the moment right now, but we do have an estimate of what it would look like if we want to open up, if we wanted to absorb some cost for changing the way we operate the facility, especially for some of our own athletic programs. I think there is some strain. I'm meeting with, unfortunately, it's just happening now, but I'm meeting with the athletic director tomorrow to kind of talk about some of this and how his budget looks and how we handle rentals and custodial overtime. But I'd like to get you a proposal from us quickly, early next week, on what it might look like or cost to do something like this, or to maybe just say, we want to have it open for our athletic programs and we want to do a rate structure like that. I think it's something we should get you. Does that sound?
I would say that's good because,
Yeah,
you know, a few of us paid for it last time, right? Okay.
And so we have the
Exactly.
athletic,
We can
but then
see
we
that on
also
the
have the
gift
non-athletic,
report.
right? The PAC and the student center. So we kind of have like a couple little projects.
Yeah,
coming out of
we'll
this.
start
Yeah.
with those, and I think we'll maybe work offline and maybe have a conversation with Parks and Recreation, since it's something we should have a joint conversation about.
Go ahead, keep going. Yeah, the
Okay.
Q&A.
Another question I had was about, we talk about public school versus private school busing on page 5. I guess my question is, do we use the same distance parameters for the private schools that we do for the public schools? Like, do they have the same radius? It's identical. Okay, just,
Part of the discrepancy too in the pricing on that question was just the under budgeting with the new contract and timing of it in the private schools. So you see a portion of that is driven by that,
got it. Thank
just
you.
a simple accounting.
And then on page 9, in terms of the special education, I know it's hard to quantify. We talked about the savings, like the cost of our unique learner program or the co-teaching versus what we're saving. And I guess how many students are in those programs, at least who could potentially be outplaced? Or maybe that's something in executive session. Yeah, so I think that would be helpful for us when we have our executive session on special ed.
Yeah, we'll be prepared to speak to that.
So while we're there on number 1 on special ed, page 9 there, I'm a little concerned about the second sentence here. To date, it is estimated the programs are assisting families to keep their children in Greenwich Public Schools with their siblings. I don't think we mean to message it that way, but that's obviously not what why we want to provide co-teaching as a program. Because we can't provide co-teaching across every school, but providing co-teaching as a service delivery model for students where it's appropriate to support their IEP needs is really the reason why we need co-teaching, not just to make them comfortable in the particular building with siblings. So I'd just be cautious about how we message that, because I think that's a lot of where we've had some of the confusion about co-teaching, and also some of the angst about convincing families where co-teaching is probably the best option for their child educationally, but it's not your neighborhood school. I think we need to be mindful of the messaging.
On page 10, I think the one before pre-K, I think we're missing an answer. Number 4.
Number 4 on page 10.
Just when you have a chance, like in the next go round.
Well, that was my question, but some of that was answered earlier, but I think the piece of, do we include the state? Does the state include the preschool program as part of our excess cost grant? Was part of it, was the question that really wasn't answered.
I'm just texting with Karen, so keep going. Yeah.
Well, do you have more? I have a quick question on that. So I know I asked this in this document. I think I just want to put it out there because I don't think there's really an answer, but we talk about the excess cost grant funding that comes back to us, funding from Medicare, funding from some of the other grants and programs that goes back into the town coffers as opposed to back towards reducing our costs and overruns for special education, which is, I think, its original intention. There's a whole, if you read through all the legalese, there's a whole bunch of things that trigger how it comes back to us. But I think that that's sort of a discussion for us to have at some point as to how, not necessarily just for us, but us to have with the town as to how those funds should be, are being used because they should be coming back to us. That's the purpose of them from the state to support special education needs. I know I had asked a question also about where the funds for facility rentals go. So I was glad to hear that some of that goes back to support the actual facilities and upkeep. But just to put that out there, since we were talking about excess grant funds here, those funds legally, it's an interesting because legally they should go to the town, but then they're still supposed to be earmarked back for us. But I don't know where they land and if they're being used.
Excess cost goes back to the town's general fund and does
Yeah.
not come back to the schools.
But it's supposed to go to the town, but no, it's supposed to come back to the board. Okay, that's why I said there's a whole bunch of, I read through a lot of
Yes.
legal documents, put me to sleep. It was very helpful.
And I think that this has been a conversation in the past before and
Years, yeah.
but it would basically to do that, similar, earlier you passed the funding resolutions, the funding, at least the way the town operates funding resolutions. So the board could probably, as you've done before, pass a budget resolution that you would then send over to the town, and the town would have to include that resolution, and that resolution would then return the funding back, and it could be once again a way to start the conversation if we draft up a resolution once again. And that's how the facilities rentals revenue gets returned back. That's how some of the other revenue gets returned back, is through that's how the superintendent is authorized to process some of these grants, because the way the town has everything, it's extremely locked down for going for appropriations. The only time you can accept funds is if they are in the budget book, the town's budget book, with an approved funding resolution. And so there's the legal conversation, but then the way that we could maybe go about it is to once again pass a resolution to return those funds back to the Board of Ed.
Well, when we get to agenda planning at some point, can we add that as somewhere? I don't know if the budget committee wants to start that discussion. Sorry to add to your plates, but I do think it's something, well, I do think it's a valid point that, we're,
Yeah, I know Peter Bernstein fought this fight, and it's one that have also had many conversations on. I know this is not a partisan issue. Many members of the BET feel that they're on the right side of history or something on this one, but we should continue to discuss this. I don't want to necessarily close the conversation, but I do know that Karen has a short window here. So if we're okay, although I do think we are coming to an end, is that fair to say? You were done? Okay. So, if we want to come back for some reason, but I think at this time, Karen, can you hear me? Can you come off mute for a second? Make sure you're good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right. So, assuming we have no new candidates, according to Robert's rules and CABES, we actually do not have to go through the whole nomination process again. So I'm seeing no hands on new nominations. Is that fair? Okay, so then what we're going to do is we have two candidates, as you guys might recall, for chair. One is Joe Kelly, the other one is Christina Downey. This is actually, I was going to say, we did this during COVID, so I knew how to do it at the time, but then we were all remote. However, I do remember a time when Megan Olson, throw back to her, used to dial in, and we did that on one chair vote. And the way we did it, Karen, just so you know, because we have to all do this on our ballots, you obviously can't do that. So I'm just going to ask you to email me, preferably, but if that's hard for you, text me your vote, and then I will say it once I've said all the other votes on the ballot. Okay?
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure how you handle the text because we have to submit these back to.
I know, then I'm going to ask
Okay.
her to then email
I can-
afterwards.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, Karen?
I'm pretty sure I can email.
Okay, that would be great. If you maybe you just email it to my board email and copy Michael Antonasio, because we have to do that for the record. Okay, so here what
Okay.
we're, sorry, can you, okay, so what we're gonna do is, obviously, we're voting for chair first. So can you all put either Christina Downey or Joe Kelly for chair on your pads and then send them over to me. Okay, so I'll keep a roll call here. So Laura Costin votes Christina Downey for chair. Christina Downey votes Christina Downey for chair. Joe Kelly votes Joe Kelly for chair. Karen Hirsch votes Christina Downey for chair. Michael Joseph votes Joe Kelly for chair. Cody Kittle votes just Joe for chair. Kathleen Stowe votes Christina Downey for chair. Give me a moment to check my email. Karen Kowalski votes Joe Kelly for chair. So that is 4-4. Therefore, I continue to be chair. Can I become like chair emeritus or something? So that means, as you guys know, we don't move on to the next office at this time. We will take this up again on December 15th.
There is something important I'd like to say, though.
Sure.
There's a big football game Sunday. It's the semifinals at Cardinal Stadium at 12:30. So everyone must think to attend the Cardinal Stadium semifinal football game, 12:30 Sunday.
You always surprise me.
We can check out our awesome heated bathrooms.
Check out our bathrooms. That's right.
They're
Oh.
heated, just saying. It was really cold the other night.
So first of all, as I said last time, and I hope you all caught my op-ed in Greenwich Time, Greenwich Free Press, and I believe it'll run in the Sentinel this weekend, sort of saying thank you so much for, trusting me to be chair, but also that we have two candidates that are awesome. So I know that right now we have a 4-4 vote, but we'll come back on the 15th and we'll continue to work together. So I think that should be the headline, Mr. Borsick, is that, all is well. And as you can see, this is a board that's working really well together. And I hope it became clear that I wouldn't, and I don't think any of us thought it would be appropriate to take a vote without all of us together. And so thank you, Karen, for meeting us during your layover, and we will keep going. So I don't know if you guys want to go back to budget Q&A. If not, I think we continue to send Blaze and Dr. Jones questions. And is that appropriate? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think maybe we'll keep the process of going through Dr. Jones and doing the Q&A. And then the same thing, if you have ARP questions, send them to Dr. Jones and we will put together another Q&A for ARP. So I think keep them going through Dr. Jones and we can put together those consolidated responses as a team.
That would be great. Okay, let's keep that. So with that, can I get a motion? Ms. Hirsch, motion to adjourn. Can I get a second? Ms. Costin, all in favor? Karen drops, so that passes 7-0. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good night.